the conduct of the Foreign Office in this matter. In a neo-colonialistic way, negotiating with Mauritius, an entity over 2,000 kilometers from the British Indian Ocean Territory, without consulting the indigenous people, the Chagossians, who we expelled in 1968 to make way for an American Air Force base. The time has come for us to respect the right of self-determination and assure the Chagossians are allowed to return to the British Indian Ocean Territory, and for them to decide the future of these islands, rather than handing them to the Chinese client puppet state of Mauritius, with highly counterintuitive to our AUKUS commitments.
Minister.
The UK has been working in close cooperation with the US since negotiations began in November 2022. They support our approach. The UK, US, Mauritius have all made clear that protecting the base on Diego Garcia, including preventing foreign malign influence, is a top priority. We'll ensure that any agreement will achieve this. It's in our national interest and those of our partners, and vital for regional and global security.
Patrick, ready?
Mr. Speaker, the government is preparing to disregard international law with its Rwanda bill today. It seems to continue to want to disregard international law with regard to decisions handed down by the ICJ and other international bodies with regard to the Chagos Island. If the UK government won't live up to its international obligations and the findings of international bodies, how with any credibility can it ask other countries to do the same?
Minister.
We're working closely with the relevant government, as we've said, with Mauritius, to take forward these negotiations, and they've been taken forward in good faith, notwithstanding the need to protect our national and regional and global interests at the same time.
Andy Slaughter. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I will answer questions 4, 5, 10, 15, 21, 22 and 23 together. Britain increased planned assistance to Palestinian civilians to £60 million and has delivered over 74 tons of aid. The recent pauses in fighting were a welcome opportunity to get hostages out and aid in. We know more is needed: more fuel, increased humanitarian access and assistance into Gaza, and compliance with international humanitarian law.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Did the Minister see the analysis recently published in the respected Israeli newspaper Haaretz that the proportion of civilian deaths in Gaza is significantly higher than the average civilian death toll in all conflicts around the world during the 20th century? Doesn't that give the lie to any claim that Israel is avoiding civilian deaths? And as the death toll in Gaza approaches 20,000, isn't it time now for the whole international community, including the UK, to support a ceasefire that protects civilian lives?
Well, he will know the importance that the government and the opposition front bench attach to saving civilian lives. And he will know that Britain has made it absolutely clear to the authorities in Israel that we expect them to abide by international humanitarian law and understand and accept the rules of war. He will equally know that the unprecedented figures that he refers to follow on the back of an unprecedented attack by terrorists on October the 7th, a pogrom where more Jewish people were murdered than at any time since 1945 and the Holocaust.
Andrew Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wholeheartedly welcome that the UK has increased its humanitarian aid by £60 million since October the 7th. Can my right honourable friend outline how his department is working to ensure that the funding is spent as effectively as possible? And by that I mean reaching those in the most urgent need, because I'm sure we have all been greatly distressed by the suffering of the innocent civilians in this conflict.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. I can tell him that we have 82 tons of food and of humanitarian supplies in Cyprus ready to go, and 5 tons of medical equipment ready to go. And as soon as there is the possibility of getting more aid and support into Gaza, we will be using those supplies to do exactly that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last 9 weeks, over 250 Palestinians, including 69 children, have been killed by the Israeli security forces in the West Bank. And over the last year, we've seen a dangerous rise in the number of attacks by violent, illegal Israeli settlers against Palestinians and their property. Even the United States announced that they would impose a travel ban on violent extremist settlers last week. But all the UK government have been able to announce is that planning is going on. So I have to ask the Minister, how much more bloodshed do we need to see before the government stops planning and starts acting? And will he take real action against violent illegal settlers today?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I made clear in the answer to question number 1 that the government condemns without qualification the illegal attacks by settlers on Palestinians. He asked me specifically, I think, about visa bans, and while I can't give a commentary across the House, I can tell him that our plans in that respect are moving forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. A stop-start approach is likely to prolong hostage captivity and increase the risk to their lives. It also continues the relentless loss of civilians and innocent children. If the UN Security Council resolution returns with a condemnation of Hamas, will the UK this time do the right thing and back an immediate humanitarian ceasefire?
Minister.
Well, as she will know, not least from the urgent question tabled by the Right Honourable Gentleman yesterday in the House, neither the government nor the opposition believe that a ceasefire is the right way to proceed. But I can tell her that we are very heavily engaged in what is happening in these Security Council resolutions, and the Security Council permanent members were at Rafah yesterday looking in detail at the situation on the ground.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There has to be a ceasefire to protect civilians in Gaza. And does the Minister agree with the US Secretary of State for Defence when he said that protecting Palestinian civilians in Gaza is both a moral responsibility and a strategic imperative? And if you drive civilians into the arms of the enemy, you replace a tactical victory with a strategic defeat. Are the government making those representations to the Israeli government?
Well, of course, the position of the American Defence Secretary is exactly the position of the British government. And that is why we say at all points that everyone must adhere to international humanitarian law.
Neil O'Brien.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House is appalled by the atrocities committed by Hamas, but also by the civilian suffering in Gaza. Will my honourable friend, set out the steps he's taking to relieve civilian suffering, and also the steps he's taking against illegal settlements and against the actions of violent settlers, because they're an obstacle to a two-state solution and a lasting and just peace?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on the first part of his question, I can tell him that we have delivered 74 tons of aid to Al Arish, which we are trying to make sure gets in. Yesterday, in terms of specific relief, I can inform the House that 100 trucks did get across the border into Rafah and 120,600 litres of fuel. So it's nothing like enough, but there was some progress yesterday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Israel has detained huge numbers of Palestinians in Gaza. The ICRC has received reports of 3,000 now missing between the 7th of October and the 29th of November, and many also in the West Bank. We've seen the images of those men stripped on the beaches. Haaretz has released an article showing that 10 to 15% of those were connected to Hamas. That meant that nearly 90% were not. Is this government making representations to the Israeli government about its treatment of Palestinian detainees?
Well, the situation she describes is not clear in the fog of war, but what I can tell her is that we emphasise to everyone the importance of abiding by international humanitarian law and, of course, the Geneva Convention to which she was referring.
Well, Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every life lost, whether Palestinian or Israeli, is a tragedy, and so often in conflict or wars, it's the children that suffer the most. On humanitarian pauses, can I ask my right honourable friend what further discussions he's had with the United States and other partners to have new humanitarian pauses? And finally, and I'm supportive of the government, but can I ask him whether he feels the Israeli response is proportionate?
So in respect of the pauses, we are arguing in every way we possibly can that there needs to be humanitarian pauses. They need to be 5 days long so that we can get relief and humanitarian supplies into Gaza. In respect of his final point about a proportionate force, as I have said earlier today in these questions, that is why we emphasise continuously the importance of abiding by the rules of war.
Shadow Minister Lynn Brown.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker. In Gaza, almost 80% of the population have been forced from their home with nowhere safe to go. Sewage is flowing in the street with enormous risk to health, while hospitals and ambulances continue to be hit. Half the population is starving. The most recent reports have over 18,000 Palestinians killed, including utterly appalling numbers of children. I recognise the efforts of ministers, but it's barely even slowing down the tide of death when the humanitarian crisis simply needs to end. Can I ask the minister, what is his strategy to do that?
Well, at all points, Britain is trying to use its brilliant international network, working not only with other of the United Nations Security Council members, but also through our intense diplomatic network around the Middle East. So in terms of trying to see a political track when it becomes available, Britain, with its allies, is doing everything possible to achieve that. In respect of the suffering to which she described, and which everyone in the House will agree with her analysis of that, we have, the Foreign Secretary announced recently an additional £30 million of support. We are looking at how that can be used specifically to assist with medical issues, and particularly with children in that extent.
James Sunderland.
Question 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
FCDO are working in partnership with the territories to develop climate security assessments through the Conflict Stability and Security Fund. Our Blue Planet programme has provided over 35 million since 2016 to enhance marine protection and build climate change resilience.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I am reassured that the UK is investing heavily in climate change adaptation. Does my honourable friend agree that the best way of future-proofing this is for the FCDO to appoint a dedicated minister for all of the overseas territories and to ensure that the UK never relinquishes sovereignty for any of them?
None of them.
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. I've recently been appointed as the FCDO minister responsible for overseas territories, and furthermore, the Prime Minister has made clear that every department should have a minister whose portfolio covers responsibilities to the OTs, and the UK has no doubt about its sovereignty over the overseas territories. Any decision to end British sovereignty should be on the basis of clear constitutionally expressed wish of the territory's people.
Shall the Minister Steve Deutsche?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you know, our global British family in the UK overseas territories contains 94% of all unique species the UK is responsible for, huge marine areas throughout the world's oceans. They're hugely vulnerable to climate change, and yet they are negligible contributors to it. It's been great to see more OTs sign up for the Blue Belt Initiative and work with groups like Great British Ocean and indeed attend the recent COP. So what is he doing to encourage more overseas territories to join the Blue Belt and to assist overseas territories to get access to strategic international funding for conservation, adaptation and resilience?
Minister.
It's an important question. Obviously, our need to tackle climate change extends widely to the OTs. We've done significant work on the Blue Belt programme, and we've engaged a large number of OTs at COP28 this year as well, so we can help push forward their work and give greater access to this funding. It's vitally important.
Sir Edmund Lee.
Number 7, sir.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We strongly condemn forced marriage and forced conversion of women and girls, including in Pakistan. We regularly raise our concerns, including individual cases at a senior level with the Pakistani authorities, and we fund projects in Pakistan to help address the underlying causes.
Sir Edmund.
At the age of 14, Mara Shabazz was abducted, forced into a marriage, raped, escaped, has been sitting in one room with her entire family, terrified. She's now 18. I've lost track of the number of meetings I've had with successive Home Secretaries, letters written. Nothing has happened to get this girl out. Yet at the same time, 100,000 fit young men are just pouring across the channel in search for a better job. For God's sake, can't we show some Christian compassion? And what more can the Foreign Office do in Pakistan to try and stop these forced conversions and forced marriages?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we continue to press these individual cases with the Pakistani government. The former Foreign Secretary raised human rights, including the persecution of minorities, with caretaker PM Kakar on 25th of September, and the Noble Lord Ahmed raised the need to protect minority communities with caretaker Foreign Minister Gilani on 13th of September, and again in a letter on the 5th of October. And we continue to raise in Islamabad the issue of forced marriage and conversion with the Pakistani authorities.
Mr. Speaker, Minister, it's not only the case of Maria Shabazz, it's the case of many other young Christian girls, young Hindu girls, young Sikh girls in Pakistan are kidnapped from a very early age. It's quite clear there's an epidemic in Pakistan of the kidnapping and abuse of young girls. Can I ask the Minister this question? What has been done with Pakistan to change the attitude and to change the law of the land?
I'm grateful for that question. So as well as making representations at a very senior level, we do fund programmes in Pakistan working to address child and forced marriages, gender-based violence and discrimination and intolerance, especially against minorities, in an effort to achieve cultural change that will attend to this. But of course, that's slow and painful work, but our team in Islamabad are fully focused on it.
McCarthy.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Israel has the right to defend itself against terror, restore its security and bring the hostages home, but they must abide by international law and take all possible measures to protect civilians.
I don't disagree with anything the Minister says there, but the question is, what does Israel having to abide by international law actually look like? We know that it's acted with impunity in the West Bank in terms of illegal settlements and historically the building the wall and so on. We know that there, as my honourable friend said, the sheer scale of casualties of innocent civilians in Gaza raises very serious questions. What does it actually mean when we say Israel has to abide by international law?
Minister.
Well, it means, Mr. Speaker, precisely what it says. And of course, the fact that Israel is a democracy, the fact that all around the world people will be looking carefully at the way things are being conducted in the region, should give her hope that international humanitarian law counts and will be supported.
Senator Minister Wayne David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, the ICC prosecutor, Karim Khan KC, visited Israel and the West Bank. In relation to Gaza, he stated, and I quote, "The law is not some cosmetic adornment that can be disregarded. It is a fundamental requirement that must be complied with." Now, I assume the Minister will agree with that. And if that is the case, will he ensure that Britain cooperates fully with the prosecutor in his work?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as a strong supporter of the International Criminal Court, Britain would always cooperate. And we strongly support the ICC. He will know that as a state party to the Geneva Convention, the Israeli government is obliged to take action against Israeli nationals accused of grave breaches of international humanitarian law, were there to be any. So that would then not be a matter for the ICC.
Teresa Villiers.
Question 9, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Minister.
Iran bears responsibility for groups they have long supported. We've stepped up our response to recent attacks. HMS Diamond will bolster our maritime presence in the region, and new Iran sanctions regime will soon be in place, giving us greater powers to designate Iranian activity.
Teresa Villiers.
The regime in Tehran have been blatant and public, even unapologetic about their backing, funding, arming of Hamas. These terrorists who we now know are not just murderers, but rapists as well. In the light of that, isn't it time to snap back the full range of sanctions on Iran, to sanction a wider number of officials in Iran, and to prescribe the IRGC?
Minister.
Our new Iran sanctions regime will be laid imminently, giving us new and enhanced powers to counter Iran's hostile activities in the UK and around the world and the repressive practices at home. We've already sanctioned more than 350 Iranian individuals and entities, including the IRGC in its entirety.
So Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with the comments by the honourable member just now, but shouldn't we also be wondering about what Iran is doing within its own borders? 419 people executed in Iran between January and July, 127 since the 7th of October, using what is happening in Israel as a cover for the much faster executions, including a 17-year-old, a child, Hamid Reza Azari, and Milad Zorevand, who is the 8th women life freedom protester who's now been executed by this horrible regime. Isn't it time we really took the case to them about their own human rights record?
Minister.
I think the honourable member makes a very important point, and we call out the brutal repression of protests that have taken place, and we continue to hold Iran to account for its human rights record, including the repression of women, girls, children, as he highlights. And we will, as I said, bring to bear a new sanctions regime to assist in these efforts.
And McLaughlin.
Oh, thank you. Question number 12, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK is working closely with international partners on this long-standing priority, including at the UN Human Rights Council, where the UK led Resolution 51-1 on Sri Lanka.
Mr. Speaker, many prominent Sri Lankans were credibly accused of war crimes against the Tamil minority, particularly towards the end of the 30-year civil war in Sri Lanka. But all these years on, they are still at large, unlike the nearly 18,000 Tamils who went missing and are still unaccounted for. In response to the SNP spokesperson earlier, we were told that war crimes, evidence of it would be taken seriously. How can the people of Palestine have any faith in that if the Tamil people of Sri Lanka have had the evidence sitting there for all these years and this government is doing nothing other than wringing its hands?
Mr. Speaker, we all take these issues very seriously, and I was in Sri Lanka just a few weeks ago, and I was therefore to raise the need for progress on human rights, on reconciliation, and indeed on accountability with the President of Sri Lanka during my visit.
Nick Colburn.
Mr. Speaker, as chair of the APPG for Tamils, could I ask my right honourable friend just to assure the House that the FCDO is actively considering the evidence for sanctioning those credibly accused of war crimes who are active participants in Sri Lankan high society, and that she will pass that evidence on to the United Nations Human Rights Council in line with Resolution 30.1?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to commend the Honourable Carter and Wallington for his really active and championing work as chair of the APPG for Sri Lanka. And he's absolutely right, and we absolutely recognise the concerns of the Sri Lankan public and indeed victim groups about the creation of a credible domestic accountability process, and we continue to urge the Sri Lankan government to address these concerns. As I say, I raised those when I was there. I was also able to discuss the issues around human rights and justice with members of civil society and Tamil representatives and the Governor of Northern Province when I was also visiting Jaffna.
Minister Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Sri Lanka is a key member of the Commonwealth family and occupies a strategically vital position geographically. Warm relations are vital, but for far too long those accused of brutal crimes in the past, including against the Tamil minority, have escaped justice. Will the Minister outline what steps she's taking to support the Tamils' cause for justice, including, if necessary, by taking action against existing and former Sri Lankan ministers? And will she outline support for Sri Lankan democracy and human rights?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right, and we welcomed the recent written update on Sri Lanka by the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and in September the UK government issued statements that emphasised that importance on inclusive transitional justice and effective governance reforms in order to highlight the arbitrary use of laws to suppress dissent. And as I said earlier, we led the UNHRC Resolution 51-1 on Sri Lanka, providing that mandate for the Office for the High Commissioner of Human Rights to be able to report on Sri Lanka. We continue to work with them.
Question number 13, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 13, 17, 20 and 24 together. There must be a political solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a two-state solution which provides justice and security for both Israelis and Palestinians.
Sarah Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The aerial bombardment by Israel of one of the most densely populated regions in the world, in Gaza, has been devastating. Recent statistics reported in Israel show that 61% of deaths in Gaza have been civilians. When the Prime Minister spoke with the Israeli Prime Minister last week, did he urge him to stop besieging and blockading Gaza, to comply with international law, which must be proportionate, and to protect innocent lives?
Well, Mr. Speaker, she is right that at the COP, the Prime Minister was also able to have meetings with Qatar, Egypt and Jordan, as well as Israel. And he reiterated the point that he has made publicly before, which is that Israel has the right to self-defense, but it must operate within international humanitarian law.
David Linden.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, the Minister talks about the need for a two-state solution, and you won't find much disagreement with that. But how can he advocate a two-state solution when the government refuses to recognise the state of Palestine? And is he confident there's going to be much left of Palestine after Israel's continued bombardment, and why we need a ceasefire right now?
Well, the government does strongly support the two-state solution. And of course, before these terrible events on October the 7th, there were new partnerships with Israel developing across the Middle East. One thinks particularly of the Emirates and Bahrain. And when there is a break in the clouds and there is an opportunity for a political track to get going, we will do everything we can to build on the important point that he was underlining.
Christopher Clarkson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding the attempted genocide of the 7th of October and the cynical use of Palestinian civilians as human shields, the single best solution for peace in the region is a two-state solution. So can I ask my right honourable friend what steps the government is taking to facilitate that? And will he agree with me that the kidnappers, murderers and rapists of Hamas cannot be involved in those negotiations?
Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we certainly agree with the United States that Gaza should be under Palestinian control in due course and that there is no place for Hamas in all of that. In respect of the point that he made about how you advance towards a two-state solution, he will know that the Foreign Secretary has been both in Tel Aviv and on the West Bank in Ramallah, and we are looking to see what Britain can do to help build the capacity of the Palestinian state in the future and to bolster it.
Chair Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will have access to intelligence, ours and that of our allies, that he may not be in a position to share with the House. So can he share his understanding of the effectiveness of Israel's campaign to weaken and eliminate Hamas and return the hostages, given the appalling and unacceptable loss of innocent Palestinian life, thousands and thousands of children maimed and killed, given the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, given that over 100 Israeli hostages remain in captivity there, and that Hamas continues to fire rockets into Israel every day?
Well, we are doing everything we can to try and help the hostages to which she referred and to try and make sure that they are able to come home. And we do that through negotiations, not least in Qatar, but also through the overflights, which I referred to earlier. So in terms of what she wants to see achieved, she may rest assured that the government takes precisely the same view.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Question 14, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We welcome the release of Leila de Lima on bail. This is a positive step for human rights and the rule of law. Mr. Speaker, the UK's ambassador has repeatedly raised this case with the Philippines government and visited her during her detention.
Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I agree with the government, it is good news that Senator de Lima has been released on bail after nearly 7 years of detention. What is the government doing in representations to those counterparts in the Philippines via the ambassador about the resolution of all the other charges against her? These are believed to stem from her vocal opposition to thousands of extrajudicial killings in connection with former President Duarte's war on drugs, and about a meaningful investigation into those killings.
Mr. Speaker, the UK government regularly engages with the government of the Philippines on the full range of our human rights concerns, and we welcome the 2020 UN Human Rights Council resolution, which proposed technical cooperation on human rights between the government of the Philippines and the United Nations. The resolution results in a 3-year UN joint programme, which commenced in 2021, to which the UK has contributed £400,000, and we will continue to work alongside them.
Ruth Jones.
Question 16, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I regularly discuss a broad range of issues, including Zimbabwe, with Commonwealth counterparts, most recently on Sunday in Dubai when I met with the Commonwealth Secretary-General, the Baroness Scotland. The decision on re-entry is for all members based on the membership requirements and the values and principles set out in the Commonwealth Charter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the recent enlargement of the Commonwealth, these are important matters that the Minister's just referenced. Over 100,000 Zimbabweans live in the UK, many in South Wales, and thousands more work all year round in our NHS. So what engagement has he had specifically with the Zimbabwean diaspora to understand the diversity of perspectives and to support their views about Commonwealth membership and other challenges and issues that they face?
Well, she is quite right that Zimbabwe has a productive and vibrant diaspora in the United Kingdom, and we hear their views many times. But following the election, where Britain warned that the election needed to be violence-free and fair, the election was certainly violence-free, and we are waiting now for the full report of the observers before making a judgment on further events.
Bob Blackman.
Question 18, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are working with international and regional partners to secure the release of hostages, including British nationals.
Blackman.
I thank my right honourable friend for that answer. The hostages that have been released report of sexual and physical violence committed against them whilst they've been in captivity. The Israeli Health Ministry reports that the individual hostages were drugged to make them look happy when they've been in the hostage position. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that Hamas are treating these hostages in an inhumane fashion? The International Red Cross should be given the opportunity to visit and see all of these hostages, and that we should ensure they're returned home as soon as possible.
Well, he is quite right, Mr. Speaker, about the rights of the International Red Cross. I can tell him that we are involved in intensive diplomatic efforts to secure the release of the hostages. This has been continually raised by the Prime Minister, who met with families of British people taken hostage by Hamas, as well as the families of hostages during his trip to Israel. So he may rest assured that while I cannot give a running commentary on these matters, we are doing everything we can to secure their release.
I wholeheartedly support the cause for the immediate and unconditional release of all the remaining hostages held by Hamas and other groups. But further to the response that the Minister gave to my honourable friend from South Shields, could I refer him to the UN Resolution 1860 in 2009, when the UK supported a ceasefire in Gaza and a permanent ceasefire followed a few days later?
Well, Mr. Speaker, she will be well aware of the view of the government and indeed the opposition front bench on the possibility of a ceasefire at this time, which we simply don't think exists. But can I say that she's referred to earlier events? That was a very different situation to the one that pertains today.
Dominic Raab.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the issue of hostage taking, the British-Russian dual national Vladimir Kara-Murza was jailed and poisoned by the Putin regime for criticising the war in Ukraine. He's a de facto hostage of the regime. I've just met with his mother, who's in Parliament today. Will the ministers arrange for me to meet the Foreign Secretary with his relatives to hear about the condition and the torture he's been subject to?
Well, I am advised, Mr. Speaker, that ministers have indeed met the family, but I will see what I can do to facilitate a meeting as he requests.
Rick Campbell.
Mr. Speaker, small numbers of hostages have been released in the past as a result of pauses in the response by the Israeli authorities. Will the Minister undertake to ensure that there's wider understanding, both here and internationally, that those pauses are best activated whenever Hamas does not take advantage of them and embed themselves in hospitals and civilian populations again?
Well, he is quite right, Mr. Speaker, to emphasise the importance of humanitarian pauses, and preferably humanitarian pauses several days long. And we are doing everything we can to try and ensure that the case for humanitarian pauses and the ability that would result of getting aid and support and supplies into Gaza is achieved.
Still Clark.
Mr. Speaker, as a member of the armed forces, question number 25.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK regularly discusses support for Ukraine with NATO allies and partners, including at the recent NATO Foreign Ministers meeting and the NATO-Ukraine Council, which the Foreign Secretary attended alongside Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba. Together, we approved an ambitious programme, including on energy security and interoperability. Allies remain steadfast in their commitment to support Ukraine through winter and for as long as it takes.
Bill Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member of the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, I recently visited NATO's Allied Rapid Reaction Corps headquarters in Gloucester. So I welcome that yesterday the Defence Secretary announced the UK-led Ukraine Maritime Capability Coalition to give our allies the power to rule the waves. So can I ask my right honourable friend what steps the UK is taking to help Ukraine to rebuild its armed forces and provide humanitarian assistance to its citizens?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes a very good point. The maritime domain is hugely important. And Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work with NATO and Ukraine, including through NATO's €500 million comprehensive assistance package, to which we have contributed £82 million. In November, the Foreign Secretary attended the first meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council at Foreign Ministers level, and he emphasised the need to sustain our support to Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding President Zelensky's meeting in the White House today and the Foreign Secretary's visit to Capitol Hill in recent days, What is the government doing to ensure that that US support for Ukraine, which is the anchor of all the European and broader international support, remains steadfast despite the ongoing political situation in the US?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are leading by example.
We don't come to topicals, Jason McCarthy.
Topical 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is focused on our vital priorities, notably supporting Ukraine, standing with Israel and providing aid to Palestinian civilians. The Foreign Secretary and I met with global leaders at COP28 who welcomed the UK's leadership at this critical time. We discussed our newly launched International Development White Paper, which seeks to get the SDGs back on track at this halfway stage when they are so far off. As mentioned before, I will deputise for the Foreign Secretary in this House and make regular statements to keep members updated.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What steps is the Foreign Office taking to persuade and encourage our NATO allies to continue and enhance not just their military, but also their civil support for Ukraine in their brave campaign against Putin's evil invasion?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to put it in those terms. The Foreign Secretary met the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba at the NATO-Ukraine Council. My honourable friend will know that nearly £10 billion in military, humanitarian and economic support has been provided by Britain since February 2022, and we were the first country to provide lethal aid, and we are the biggest contributor to the armed forces in Ukraine of any single nation.
So, Secretary of State David Lammy.
Mr. Speaker, an aggressive threat to a smaller neighbour, an attack on recognised international borders, an illegitimate referendum stoking historical grievances. The Putin playbook is being copied in Caracas by Maduro. We must stand up to bullies and tyrants with imperial ambitions. As we maintain our steadfast commitment to Ukraine, can the Minister reaffirm the UK's unwavering support for Guyana's sovereignty?
Yes, I can, Mr. Speaker. And yesterday I attended a meeting convened by the Secretary-General of the Commonwealth, which put out a statement last night, which I very much hope will reassure him.
Lynn Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What progress has my right honourable friend made on granting full environmental protection to the waters around the South Sandwich Islands, plus additional protections and improved management around South Georgia?
The South Georgia and Sandwich Islands Marine Protected Area provides comprehensive protection against the entire maritime zone. It's been rated as one of the most sustainable in the world, and the government is currently undertaking its second 5-year review. Review report is expected early next year.
McCarthy.
Alexei Navalny has gone missing from his penal colony, hasn't been heard of for almost a week. Can the Minister join in international counterparts in making urgent representations to try to find out where he is and to ensure his personal safety?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we do condemn this outrageous detention, and we will continue to make representations in Moscow and elsewhere for consular access and his release.
James Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, the World Malaria Report for 2023 shows that the number of malaria cases and deaths remains above pre-pandemic levels. What more can the government do to ensure that we recover lost ground and also drive
treatments?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Minister for Africa has rightly highlighted the RSF's involvement in atrocities in Darfur, and many in this place have flagged the links between external states and the RSF. So when the Minister was in Dubai for COP28, did he raise the issue of external support for the RSF with those deemed to be likely to be responsible?
Well, I raise these issues not only at the COP, but whenever I have the opportunity, and not least in discussions with Hamdok, who was the last Prime Minister in Sudan. And while we welcome last Saturday's Intergovernmental Authority on Development Summit's call for an immediate cessation of hostilities, we remain acutely concerned at the events that are taking place, many of which bear the hallmarks of ethnic cleansing.
Ben Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The threat to Guyana's territorial integrity has already been highlighted. Can he reassure me that we are taking steps with our allies in the region to deter any use of force by the Maduro dictatorship?
Minister.
Venezuela's actions with regard to 1899, and we're working with our regional partners such as Brazil and international
some 70 journalists. The vast majority of media casualties have been Palestinian journalists who kept working in the face of airstrikes and the deteriorating humanitarian situation because of the lack of information and because international media are being denied access. The National Union of Journalists warns of systemic targeting of journalists in Palestine, a further breach of international law. How will the Minister impress upon the Israeli government these specific obligations?
Well, as I said earlier, we do impress the importance of abiding by the rules of war. But can I say that I pay particular tribute to the bravery of the humanitarian workers who put them in harm's way, unarmed, in order to help their fellow citizens.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What precedence does the current negotiations between London and Port Louis over the future of the British Indian Ocean Territory have on the sovereignty of other uninhabited overseas territories and indeed the British sovereign base areas in Cyprus?
Minister, I'm doing two things at once.
As raised earlier in the topical, in the substantive questions, we continue to have our negotiations on BIOT, which we're taking forward in good faith.
Mr.
Speaker, not just citizens of the United Kingdom, but the government
the need for security, which may pertain to the release of hostages. So I think this is entirely a good thing.
Mark Logan.
Mr. Speaker, as Vice Chair APPG Japan, we hosted over 60 companies here in Parliament recently, with thanks to the Minister for Investment and Blake Rothenberg. With increasing securitisation in international politics, isn't it more important than ever to big up UK-Japan commercial opportunities? And as the Japanese say, ganbatta ne.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the UK-Japan bilateral relationship has never been stronger. The Hiroshima Accord, which the Prime Minister agreed with Prime Minister Kishida on the 19th of May, cements and builds upon a period of sustained growth and deepening of our enhanced global strategic partnership.
Dr. Roseanne Allen-Khan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As many of us go home tonight and kiss our children, parents in Gaza will be searching for body parts to recognise their children and burying them. Families broken, futures stolen. Is the Minister comfortable with over 18,000 innocent Palestinian civilians being killed, many of them children? And when will he do the right thing and call for a ceasefire?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, she reflects the pain and agony that those parents feel with great eloquence and which is felt across the House. But the issue is, how do we address the causes of what happened on October the 7th and the fact that a pogrom was imposed by Hamas, killing so very many Jewish people. And we have to move towards a moment where the political sky is clear and there is an opportunity for a new political initiative.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer the House to my register of interests. Does my honourable friend recognise the recent joint statement from Armenia and Azerbaijan as a historic milestone towards the normalisation of relations? And can he tell us what his government or this government is doing towards a lasting peace treaty?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are greatly encouraged by this joint statement from Azerbaijan and Armenia and confirming their intent to normalise relations. As I made clear to both countries during my recent visit, we fully support their efforts to achieve a historic and lasting peace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In answer to question 9, the Minister seemed to say that the government was planning to completely prescribe the IRGC. Could he confirm that? Because if that is the case, it will be welcomed across both sides of the House.
I said that what we were going to be doing is introducing a new sanctions regime, just to be clear.
My constituent, Amani Ahmed, Mr. Speaker, arrived here from Gaza for her PhD just days before the outbreak of the war and is now desperately trying to bring her husband and 3 children to the UK. UKVI advises travelling to the nearest visa application centre, but that's impossible as they're unable to leave Gaza. Can the Minister urgently intervene to ensure Amani's family are able to join her safely in the UK?
Well, she will know, Mr. Speaker, that there is a specific track to pursue on this. And if she has not already been in touch with the crisis centre at the Foreign Office, that is what she should do immediately.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, I was contacted by the Kennington Bethlehem Link, a voluntary group dedicated to working with Israeli and Palestinians. They raised the case of Anas Abu Sawa, who was arrested by the Israeli army. This week, it was announced he's been detained for 6 months in administrative detention, and the reason for his arrest is still unclear. And it's been 9 days and over 6,000 people have signed a petition in support of this. Will the minister please raise this with the Foreign Secretary to urgently work with his Israeli counterpart so we can know why he was imprisoned?
Well, if she will make available to me the full details of that case, assuming that she has not already told the Foreign Office, then I will look into it for her and make sure she gets an answer.
David Hamilton.
Mr. Speaker, that great world-beating British charity, the Halo Trust, has just announced the destruction of its 2 millionth landmine. Will the minister join with me in congratulating them and also pledge further funding, which is going to be vital and necessary if it's going to deal with the outcome of Ukraine?
Minister.
He is absolutely right to pay tribute to Halo. I was, before I returned to government, an ambassador for Halo, so I speak with some pride in this matter. And if he looks carefully at the International Development White Paper, which drew strength from all across the House in its commitments and identifying important aspects, he will see that Halo is mentioned there.
Ian Paisley.
Good to see you back in your place. Is the department monitoring the case of the British citizen who's been currently taken through the Vatican State courts, Ralph Manconi? Are they monitoring that case, and are they making any recommendations or representations to the Vatican court about that case? And would his officials agree to meet with me to discuss it?
Well, I can certainly organise that someone meets the honourable gentleman to discuss this, but as he will know, the arrangements with the Vatican were changed substantially in the year 1534 in the reign of King Henry VIII. And as far as I know, there's been no change since then to reverse that.
Alison Doulis.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. India's Supreme Court has upheld the Indian government's decision to revoke Article 370 of the Constitution, which granted special status to Jammu and Kashmir. Can the Minister tell me what assessment he has made of this situation, as many Kashmiri constituents are quite worried about this?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we took note of the Supreme Court decision and we continue to discuss with both parties the need both to resolve that continuing situation, but also to have constructive dialogue with those Kashmiris involved.
That completes questions. A point of order, Curry McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With crucial talks at COP28 locked in disagreement, we're hearing reports that the climate change minister is on his way back to the UK. It is said he will continue to be the lead UK minister for negotiations, with any final decisions agreed with him. I don't see how that can quite be the case when he's on an aeroplane. We can only assume that he's being called back because of tonight's Rwanda vote, and that saving the Prime Minister's skin is somehow seen as more important than trying to save the planet. So can Mr. Speaker tell me, how can we bring the Minister to this House to explain why he has left the COP talks and what that means for our negotiations?
Well, the good news. Oh, sorry, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, further to that point of order, a government, as you will know, is seamless, and while the Minister for Climate Change is anxious to support the government in the important legislation tonight, my noble friend Lord Benyon, one of the UK's greatest experts on climate change, is in Dubai today at the COP to ensure that a senior minister is representing Britain in these vital negotiations.
Right, let us move on to presentations of bills. Dame Maria Miller. Either sit down or at least wait. It's very discourteous to the member. Both sides.
Commonwealth Parliamentary Association.
Just sit down for a moment, please. Second reading what day?
Friday, the 19th of January, sir.
Friday the 19th of January. Presentation of bills, Dame Maria Miller.
Offences Against the Person Act 1861 Sentencing Guidelines Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, the 19th of January, sir.
Friday the 19th of January. Thank you. Right. We now come to the next presentation of bills, Sarah Dye.
Public Transport Rural Areas Bill.
Second reading, what day?
Friday the 26th of January. Sir.
Friday the 26th of January. Thank you. Right, let people now leave. Now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Safety of Rwanda, Asylum and Immigration Bill, second reading.
Now, the reasoned amendment in the name of the Leader of the Opposition has been selected. The Minister now to move the second reading, or Secretary of State, the Home Secretary himself, James Cleverly.
Mr. Speaker, with your indulgence, before I formally move the bill, the House may well be aware that tragically there has been death on the BEB Stockholm barge. I'm sure that the thoughts of the whole House, like mine, are with those affected. The House will understand that at this stage I'm uncomfortable in going into any more details, but we will, of course, investigate fully. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time. Yeah. This government is stopping the boats. Arrivals are down by a third this year as illegal entries are on the rise elsewhere in Europe. Indeed, small boat arrivals are up by 80% in the Mediterranean. They are down by a third across the Channel. The largest ever small boats deal with France, tackling the supply of boat engines and parts. The arrest and conviction of people smugglers. A 70% increase in the raids on illegal working. These things are having an impact, and a positive one. We have signed returns agreements and cooperation agreements with France, with Bulgaria, with Turkey, Italy, Georgia, and Ethiopia. 50 hotels are being returned to the local communities, and the initial asylum backlog, which stood at 92,000, is now under 20,000. We have sent back 22,000 illegal migrants. And the UK's arrangement with Albania proves that deterrence work. Last year, not just yet, I've just started. Last year, a third of all those arriving in small boats to the coast of this country were Albanian. This year, we've returned 5,000 Albanians, and arrivals from that country are down by 90%, 90%. But in recent years, some of the government's efforts to tackle illegal migration and deport foreign national offenders have been frustrated by a seemingly endless cycle of legal challenges and rulings from domestic and foreign courts. Of course, just momentarily, of course, this government respects court judgments, even when we disagree with them. But Parliament and the British people want an end to illegal immigration, and they support the Rwanda plan.
I'm very grateful to the Home Secretary for giving way, but he's pointed to deterrence, and he's often used the Australian model of offshoring detention centres as a gold standard. What are his comments then, the fact that Australia has recently shut down their offshore centre because of the high financial and human costs?
Home Secretary.
The Honourable Lady raises the case of Australia. Their illegal migrations by boats, 55,000 they had, trended pretty much down to zero. Deterrence works. Deterrence works.
I thank my right honourable friend, I'm sure, will agree that the British are world champions at queuing. We don't like queue jumpers, which is why illegal immigration grates with us. Can he confirm that the government will take all steps to ensure that we will remain within international law, just not now, but going forward? In which case, I will certainly be supporting the bill tonight. But can he also, does he also agree with me that some colleagues in this place need to be careful what they wish for?
Secretary. So I am confident, and indeed the conversations that I've had with the government's legal advisors reinforce my belief that the actions that we are taking, whilst novel, whilst very much pushing at the edge of the envelope, are within the framework of international law. And that is important. That is important because the UK is a country that demonstrates to the whole world the importance of international law. We champion that on the world stage, and it's important that we demonstrate it. I'm going to make further progress. Judges, of course, play an important role, but they are not policymakers. They should not be policymakers. And so when the courts find a particular formulation of policy unlawful, it is the job of politicians to listen to their views, respect their views, and find a solution. I will make further progress. Thanks to the efforts on the part of the UK government and the government, that is exactly what we have done in response to the verdict from the Supreme Court. The new treaty that I signed last week with Rwanda and the bill that accompanies it are game-changing. The principle of relocating people to a safe country to have their asylum claim processed there is entirely consistent with the terms of the Refugee Convention. Both the High Court and the Court of Appeal unanimously confirmed this point.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. He was an excellent Foreign Secretary, so he will know the extraordinary tensions that exist between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. The Democratic Republic of Congo accuses Rwanda of sponsoring the M23 terrorist organization, which is violating Congolese women and killing Congolese soldiers. The Congolese president has named the Rwandan president as a Hitler-like figure this week. What is his response to the concerns of our Congolese friends in this regard?
In my former role, I had extensive conversations with the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda. We do not agree with that assessment of the government of Rwanda. And more importantly, other international organizations also rely heavily on Rwanda. The UNHCR, the European Union, these are organizations which rely heavily on Rwanda. They would not do that. If they believed Rwanda was an unsafe country. I do intend to make further progress. As a second reading debate, there will be plenty of opportunity for colleagues to speak. No.
Can I thank the Minister for giving way? Minister, just yesterday I received correspondence which I need to quote. EU Council Directive 2005/85 EC is cut by Article 2 of the Protocol, therefore can be relied upon in Northern Ireland, but not in the GB in relation to the Rwanda bill coming forward. Article 7 confers the right to remain in the territory whilst a claim is being processed. This clearly creates additional rights in the NI, which doesn't apply in GB, and expressly frustrates the core intent of the Rwanda bill for applying in Northern Ireland. Has the Minister had the opportunity to look to that?
Home Secretary.
The point he makes about differential treatment in different parts of the United Kingdom is one that we are conscious of. As the bill progresses, of course, he will have, and others will have, the opportunity to raise concerns about specific details. And we will, of course, listen to his and the concerns of others. This bill attempts, and this bill, when passed, will address the practical implications. At the moment, the challenges of numbers of refugees in Northern Ireland is not one that is as significant as in other parts of the UK, but we're always conscious to make sure that all parts of the UK, and he has heard me say this before, that all parts of the UK are and feel that they are in the thinking of the government as we move forward. I am going to make further progress. As I say, the principle of relocating people to a safe country to have their asylum claims processed is entirely consistent And as I say, the High Court and the Court of Appeal unanimously confirm this. And the Supreme Court, in their findings 3 weeks ago, did not dispute those findings. I will give way, and then
I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable friend. Does he agree that it is clear in international law and also in relation to the question of the rule of law that where in this country, with our unwritten constitution, a clear and unambiguous use of words clearly establishing the intention of Parliament in the enactment of a law does in fact take precedence over international law in accordance with the judgments of Lord Hoffman and also other judgments and statements made by Lord Judge, Lord Denning, and other very distinguished jurists, including in relation to this particular judgment last month in paragraph 144.
Secretary.
My honourable and learned friend makes an important point, and he is right. That when the wording of a bill is clear and unambiguous, where there is a deeming clause, that is the express will of the Parliament. The Parliament is sovereign, and that thinking must be adhered to through the legal process. So he is right on that. I am going to make progress. I am going to make progress. A few weeks ago, the Supreme Court upheld the judgment of the Court of Appeal, meaning that we cannot yet lawfully remove people to Rwanda. This is because of concerns that they expressed that relocated individuals might be refooled. And I'm sure the House knows, but that is that they might be redeported to a third country. The government disagreed with that verdict, but as I said, we respect the verdict of their lordships. It is important to understand that the Supreme Court's judgment was based on the facts as they existed 18 months ago, and that the court said the problem could be remedied. And as I told the House last week, we have worked on and have found that very remedy. Our asylum partnership with Rwanda I'm going to make progress. Our asylum partnership with Rwanda sets out in a legally binding international treaty the obligations both of the United Kingdom and of Rwanda within international law. It also sets out, and then I will.
I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. As he says, international law and domestic law are both important, but they are different. This bill seeks to give this House the power to deem Rwanda a safe country. Can he confirm for me that what it does not seek to do is to suggest that this country or this House has the power to deem itself in compliance with international law? And my worry stems from clause 1(5) of this bill, which of course reflects the government's intention to deem Rwanda a safe country, but then goes on to describe a safe country as one to which persons may be removed in compliance with all of the United Kingdom's obligations under international law. Will he confirm it isn't the government's intention to suggest that it falls to any country to deem itself in compliance with international law? He doesn't need me to explain what the consequences of that might be elsewhere in the world. That is not what the government's intention is, and he will look again at the language if it needs to be changed to clarify that point.
Secretary.
I can reassure my right honourable and learned friend that that is absolutely not the intention of the bill. We are the deeming clause. The deeming clause is specifically about the safety of Rwanda because of our response to their lordship's position at the Supreme Court hearing. We are not seeking to redefine through domestic legislation international law. And then I will give way to the honourable learned lady.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. If he's right and the treaty with Rwanda, it meets the concerns of the Supreme Court, then why is this bill necessary? If Rwanda is now a safe country as a result of the treaty, why is this highly controversial bill that's clearly causing him great problems in his own parliamentary party, why is it necessary?
Because we are putting forward legislation which will be clear and unambiguous, so as to support the treaty. And the treaty addresses the concerns raised by their lordships. And with the indulgence of the House, Mr. Speaker, I do intend to make some progress. I want to make sure that others have the full chance to speak in this debate. As I say, the bill sets out to Parliament and to the courts why Rwanda is safe for those relocated there. The treaty that I signed last week puts beyond legal doubt the safety of Rwanda. It provides the basis to end the merry-go-round of legal challenges that have second-guessed the will of Parliament and frustrated this policy, this House, and the desire of the British people. Rwanda will introduce an even stronger end-to-end asylum system, stronger still than the one which underpins their relationship with the UNHCR. It will have a specialist asylum appeals tribunal.
I thank the Home Secretary for giving way. Since we last spoke in this House, it's been now confirmed that the government has given the Rwandan government 240 million, with a further 50 million to come in April, all independently of anybody being sent to Rwanda. Can he now also confirm that the government's deal also means a further 50 million in 2025 and a further 50 million on top of that in 2026?
Home Secretary.
Well, the Right Honourable Lady is asking me to confirm figures which we have put in the public domain. So, unsurprisingly, I'm totally comfortable. I'm totally comfortable confirming what I've already said, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It provides Rwanda, as I say, will introduce an even stronger. She's got the chance to make a speech in just a few moments. She has got the chance to make a speech in just a few moments. It will have one Rwandan. The system of specialist asylum tribunals to consider individual appeals against any refused claim within Rwanda. It will have one Rwandan and one other Commonwealth co-president, and will be made up of judges from a mix of nationalities selected by the co-presidents. We have been working, and this comes to the point she's making about the money that has been spent by the British government. As is the case with many countries around the world, the government spends money capacity building with our international partners. And we have been working extensively with, I'm going to make progress. We have been working extensively with Rwanda to build capacity too. The treaty makes clear that anyone we locate to Rwanda cannot be removed except back to the United Kingdom. It is binding in international law, and it enhances the role of the Independent Monitoring Committee, which will have the power to set its own priority areas for monitoring. The committee will have unfettered access to monitor the entire relocation process, from initial screening to relocation and settlement in Rwanda. Relocated individuals and legal representatives will be able to lodge confidential complaints directly with that committee. It is this treaty and the accompanying evidence pack that enables the government to conclude with confidence that Rwanda is safe. We will need to be certain that domestic and foreign courts will also respect the treaty. And that is why we have introduced the bill. And
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. On that point on foreign courts, 5.2 of the bill says that it's for a Minister of the Crown to decide whether the United Kingdom will comply with the interim measure. Is the advice from the Attorney General that it will be compatible with international law for a minister to refuse to comply with such an indication?
Secretary.
Well, my right honourable friend, who is an expert proceduralist in this House, will know that advice from the AG to government is privileged, and I am not going to be sharing it at the dispatch box. But he will also know that the government's position is clear and unambiguous, that this is in accordance with international law. So he can rest assured on that. And I will give way briefly, and then.
I'm going to right from giving way. Will he confirm that, in fact, as a matter of law, an interim measure under Rule 35 is directed not to the courts of the United Kingdom, but to the governments of the member states? So therefore, what the bill says simply restates what is the position anyway. It's the member state that it applies to, not the courts.
Secretary.
My honourable learned friend is absolutely right. I will give way one more time, then I will make more progress.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Home Secretary for giving way. He says he won't reveal the Attorney General's advice to the House. That's fine. But on the issue of the money, his permanent secretary was in front of the Public Accounts Committee yesterday and told us that, as well as the payment due of 50 million next year, there are payments planned for years 4 and 5. Is he willing to share with the House how much payment will be made to Rwandans in years 4 and 5 of this programme?
Secretary.
The honourable lady will know that we have committed to a reporting schedule which is completely consistent with other government departments, completely consistent with the reporting schedule of the Home Office in other files, and we absolutely intend to commit to doing that. So the reason we have introduced this bill, it builds on the Illegal Migration Act and complements all other measures that this government is employing to end illegal migration. The Safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Bill makes it unambiguous and clear that Rwanda is safe and will prevent the courts from second-guessing the will of this sovereign parliament. It gives, if I've got to make progress, it gives effect to the judgment of Parliament that Rwanda is a safe country, notwithstanding UK law or any interpretation of international law. For the purposes of the bill, a safe country is one to which people may be removed from the United Kingdom in compliance with all of the UK's obligations under international law. And I hope that will reassure my right honourable and learned friend, and that are relevant to the treatment in that country of people who are removed there. It means that someone removed to that country will not be removed or sent to another country in contravention of any international law. And anyone who seeks asylum or who has had an asylum determination will have their claim determined and be treated in accordance with that country's obligations under international law. I'm going to make progress. I've been generous, but I want others to have the chance to speak. Anyone removed to Rwanda under the provisions of this treaty will not be removed from Rwanda, except to the United Kingdom in a very small number of limited and exceptional circumstances. Should the UK request the return of any relocated person, Rwanda will return them. Decision makers, and that includes both myself or the holder of the post of Home Secretary, an immigration officer, or the courts, must all treat Rwanda as a safe country, and they must do so notwithstanding all relevant UK law or any interpretation of international law by courts or tribunals. And that includes the European Convention on Human Rights, the Refugee Convention, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, the UN Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane or Degrading Treatments or Punishment, the European Convention on Actions Against Trafficking in Human Beings done at Warsaw, 16th of May 2005, customary international law, and any other international law or convention or rule of international law whatsoever, including order, judgment, decision, or measure of the European Court of Human Rights. The Prime Minister has been crystal clear that he and the government that he leads will not let foreign courts destroy this Rwanda plan and curtail our efforts to break the business model, of those evil people smuggling gangs. Where
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. He makes the point about foreign courts. Well, what about domestic courts? Is there not a danger that in pursuing quite stringent measures in this bill, that we are really testing the principle of comity to breaking point? This House is, and this Parliament is sovereign, but we also have the independence of the courts and the rule of law to bear in mind, and restraint on both sides by the judiciary and by this place is essential if we are to maintain the balance of our constitution.
Secretary.
My right honourable and learned friend, who knows I have a huge amount of respect for him, not just as a friend, as an individual, but also his experience at the bar, at a very high level within the bar. He raises an important point, and I want to give him complete reassurance that we have looked very, very carefully at the balance that he speaks about. We absolutely respect the importance of that. We genuinely believe this does get the balance right, although because of the growing nature of this extreme and perverse trade in human misery, we have to take firm action, and we are therefore acting in a way that maintains that balance. But it is novel. He says it's contentious. It is true, but we are doing it because we have to break this business model. We have to do this. We have to do this. When the European Court of Human Rights indicates, and this speaks to the point my right honourable friend made just a few moments ago, where the European Court of Human Rights indicates an interim measure relating to the intended removal of someone to Rwanda under, or purportedly under, a provision of the Immigration Act, a Minister of the Crown, not a court or a tribunal, a Minister of the Crown alone will decide whether the UK will comply with that interim measure. And in order to further prevent individual claims to prevent removal, the bill disapplies certain relevant provisions from the Human Rights Act 1998, in particular circumstances, including sections 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, and 9. This is lawful. This is fair. This is necessary, because we have now addressed every reason that has been used to prevent their removal to Rwanda. We have prevented asylum claims from being admitted with legislation that has, we have blocked asylum claims from being admitted with legislation that has already passed through this House. When the Illegal Migration Act is enforced, modern slavery disqualification provisions will assist with speedy removal. The only possible blocking of removal is if an individual can demonstrate with compelling evidence that there is an immediate risk of serious and irreversible harm to them in particular under their individual circumstances. This sets the bar, rightly, very high, so that the chances of that happening are, rightly, extremely small. Mr. Speaker, the only way to deter people from coming here illegally is to convince them that if they do, they will be unable to stay. Instead, they will be detained and swiftly removed to a safe third country or their home country if it is safe to do so. I'm going to conclude. I've been at my feet for a while. I'm going to conclude. This is how we will save lives at sea. This is how we will deter illegal migration. And this, Mr. Speaker, and the House should take note of this, this is how we will break the business model of the most evil and perverse trade that we currently can see. And that is the trade in vulnerable people. The people smugglers, they are not humanitarians, Mr. Speaker. They are vicious criminals, and we must take action to prevent them. This is how we restore confidence in our immigration system and assert full control over our borders. Let me conclude. I'm nearly done. Let me conclude. This is how we will overcome the intolerable pressure on taxpayers, on public services, and on local communities that illegal immigration creates. That's how we will make sure that the system is fair. Fair to those who play by the rules, and fair to the British people who are rightly sick of people arriving here from France in small boats, from France, a safe and wonderful country. Rwanda stands ready to welcome those new arrivals. They stand ready to find a solution, to work with us to find a solution on this global issue, rather than being part of a problem. And for that, I believe they should get our thanks and admiration. This is an innovative and humane solution to a growing global problem. Other countries are looking at what we are doing and are making similar plans of their own. A new treaty and this bill make clear in law that Rwanda is a safe country in which to relocate illegal migrants. And I want to extend an offer to the whole House. Colleagues across this House must know how much this matters to our constituents. Our voters, for whatever party they vote for, are warm and welcoming people to those in genuine need. And we've seen this, Mr. Speaker, we've seen this in the way that people across this country have opened their homes to many of the 500,000 people who have come here via safe and legal routes in the last decade. But the British people rightly expect everyone to play by the rules, and they expect us in this House to do what it takes to stop the boats. That is what voting for this legislation means. Our voters are horrified when they see images of people drowning in the Channel. They are horrified when they see those people smugglers taking advantage of people. They want an end to illegal migration. This government has a plan that will provide an alternative home for illegal arrivals to the UK and to deter others from coming here illegally. And I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the bill now be read a second time. I now call the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join with the Home Secretary in expressing our sympathy with the family and friends of the asylum seeker who has apparently died on the Bibi Stockholm, and I understand he cannot say more about that at this moment. But this should be a debate about how we prevent lives being lost, about how we strengthen our border security, about how we stop dangerous boat crossings, and how we fix the broken asylum system. Instead, we've just got total Tory chaos. What a fine mess this week Prime Minister has got them all into and got the country into as well. Tearing lumps out of each other over a failing policy while they let the country down. We've had a Home Secretary sacked, an Immigration Minister resigning, and they've spent almost £300 million of taxpayers' money on Rwanda without sending a single person. And the Home Secretary seemed to confirm today that, in fact, that is £400 million without a single person being sent. More Home Secretaries sent to Rwanda than asylum seekers. It's about £100 million per trip. The Climate Minister called back from the Dubai COP for the vote. Well, I guess they can say at least one flight has taken off as a result of this legislation. The third Tory Home Secretary sent to Rwanda in 2 years, the third bilateral agreement with Rwanda in 2 years, and now the third Tory law on asylum and Rwanda in 2 years. And they're about to write their fourth cheque to Rwanda. Turns out they set out a deep direct debit, hundreds of millions of pounds for a failing scheme that's only ever likely to cover a few hundred people, less than 1% of those claiming asylum last year, for a failing scheme that's actually become a proxy for the deep civil wars in the Tory party, this carousel of Conservative chaos. We've got the European Research Group, the Northern Research Group, the New Conservatives, the Old Conservatives, the One Nation Group, the implausibly named Conservative Growth Group. And if you thought that was an oxymoron, we've also got the Conservatives Common Sense Group too. I mean, seriously, so many fighting factions, but all with one thing in common: they don't believe in this bill. And the Prime Minister forced into an emergency breakfast meeting this morning less a smoked salmon offensive and more buttering them up with butties and bacon and a side briefing and backstabbing, promising them amendments and then rowing back, telling them he really wants to break international law, but the Rwandan government won't let him, hiding behind the Kigali administration because he is too weak to even defend his plan. Weak, weak, weak. The Prime Minister says his patience is wearing thin. Well, how do they think the country feels watching this chaos? He's hoping his party's going to calm down over Christmas, but they all know who the Christmas turkey is, and he's sitting in number 10. Can I will give way to the honourable member first.
John Barron.
I thank the right honourable lady for giving way, but the Prime Minister has come up with a plan. He's committed to it. We've had assurances from the dispatch box that all steps will be taken to stay within international law. Can I ask the right honourable lady, what is the official opposition's plan?
Well, I'd say he hopes that his Prime Minister has a plan, but in fact, nobody on the backbenches from any side seems to actually agree with it at all. We're clear what we should be doing is using the hundreds of millions of pounds that the government is wasting in cheques written to Rwanda for nothing, for a scheme that at best will only send a few hundred people. Instead, we should be using that money to strengthen our border security, to go after the criminal gangs, and to make sure that we clear the asylum backlog and save the taxpayer billions of pounds. Well, actually, he hasn't. The Home Secretary likes to claim that he's doing this, and he likes to claim that he's bringing down the number of people in hotels. But in fact, they've gone up to a record high, 56,000, since the Prime Minister said he was going to end asylum hotel use. In fact, they've gone up by a further 10,000 because he is failing. Now, let me welcome the new immigration ministers to their posts. One of them who's obviously been an immigration minister before. I think during the time he was immigration minister before, net migration trebled and the number of boat crossings also trebled, but I'm sure nobody will hold that against them. They've obviously appointed 2 immigration ministers, this time in case another one resigns, because he thinks that their policy is totally failing and is too weak. And I think, in the words of the ex-immigration minister, this new law won't work, doesn't do the job, and is both legally and operationally fundamentally flawed. I'll give way to the honourable member if he can say whether he agrees with the previous